Charting Toward Intimacy covers mature topics. Listener discretion is advised. What does the church actually teach about foreplay? I see this question a lot. I see a lot of questions around the orgasms and when and how they can happen for male and female. And so I just wanted to create a super quick, super simple episode to just give you a rundown of what foreplay is and the church teachings on it. So let's jump in. Welcome to Charting Toward Intimacy, the sex and intimacy podcast for Catholic women. My name is Ellen Holloway, and I'm a Catholic speaker and coach who specializes in sex and marital intimacy. And I am on a mission to help you actually enjoy and desire good, holy sex with your spouse. All right, so today we're talking a little bit about foreplay. And before we jump into the episode, I wanted to share with you guys that I have a brand new completely free 5-day course on foreplay. So if you want to dive in even more, definitely go get that completely free 5-day course on foreplay. The link is in the show notes, so please go check it out. It's a lot of fun. I jam-packed a ton of info in there. It's fantastic. Okay, so let's first start off with what is foreplay. Now, I preface that this episode is what does the church teach about foreplay? What I'm going to talk about right this second of what is foreplay isn't in some church document somewhere. This is my own definition to just give you an idea of what I'm talking about when I say the word foreplay. So foreplay is immediate arousal time prior to intercourse. So foreplay is part of a full sexual act. So the foreplay that I am talking about in this episode is the time immediately prior to intercourse. Intercourse meaning that the man's penis is inside of the woman's vagina. The foreplay is what happens before that to arouse both spouses in order to prepare for intercourse. Foreplay a lot of times is defined in all sorts of different ways. So that is just what I'm talking about in this episode. And I'm going to give you kind of the understanding of what the church teaches on that particular aspect. Okay, so let's talk about sexual arousal. Sexual arousal is designed to be a part of the sexual act. Sexual arousal has a physiological effect. What it does is it literally prepares the body for intercourse. So if we look at a man's body, sexual arousal prepares his body for intercourse by making the penis erect, right? Blood flows to that area. The corpus spongiosum fills with blood. It becomes hard and erect. The penis grows longer, gets a little wider, and it is ready for intercourse. An unerect penis can't really do intercourse because it's just too floppy, right? The same process is happening in the woman's body. Her body needs to prepare for intercourse. So during sexual arousal, blood flows to the vulva area. The clitoris fills with blood. It actually does, in fact, become a little bit more erect. It grows in size. The clitoris is an internal organ, so we don't see a lot of this. You might see the nub, the head of the clitoris, getting a little bit bigger, a little bit more erect, getting a little harder as well. But you don't see most of what's going on. But that internal structure of the clitoris is filling with blood, which is actually going to allow for the woman to experience more sexual pleasure because the pleasure organ of the woman, the clitoris, is now touching more area internally. The bulbs of the clitoris are actually touching the outside of the vaginal canal. This makes vaginal penetration actually possible to be pleasurable. It's not possible to be pleasurable until those bulbs are full of blood. So the process of sexual arousal prepares the woman's body for sexual pleasure, and it prepares it for intercourse in that the vaginal opening is actually going to widen. So it's going to get bigger in order for there to be room for the penis to enter. And the vaginal canal is actually going to lengthen. The cervix is going to rise up a little bit. The canal itself is actually going to lengthen. And again, that's allowing space for the penis. So this sexual arousal is absolutely necessary for sex to be possible, for intercourse to be possible. That sexual arousal is achieved through foreplay. So foreplay is therefore not an optional activity. It literally has to happen. Now, there's no amount of time that foreplay has to take or doesn't have to take, right? Like foreplay can be very short as long as both the woman and the man are physically ready for intercourse. I do not suggest that the woman move into intercourse before her body is properly aroused, because most likely you're going to get pain. You're definitely not going to feel very much sexual pleasure, if any at all. There's going to be no arousal fluid. There's really, really low lubrication. Like, it's just not a good idea. Now, the man's arousal curve is typically a whole lot faster than the woman's arousal curve. And so foreplay for the man might need to only be 30 seconds. That process of sexual arousal might not need to be that long. For the woman, that process of sexual arousal typically needs at least a few minutes, if not much longer than that. I like to say, if a couple is not doing any foreplay at all, to just like set a timer and at least do 10 minutes. Foreplay can be super fun. And again, I mentioned that free foreplay course at the beginning of this episode. I talk about some of the ways that foreplay can be super, super fun and some things that you can do during foreplay if you're like, what the heck would we even do? So go check that out. Again, link in the show notes. But we need that foreplay in order to be ready for intercourse. I hope that I have sufficiently explained that to you and gotten you on board with the yes, we need to have foreplay. So now what can we do in foreplay? So orgasm. The man's orgasm is inherently connected to the procreative purpose. The man's orgasm is inherently connected to the procreative purpose. The man's orgasm happens at the same time as ejaculation. That's what I mean by that repetitive statement I just made. That means that his orgasm has to happen during intercourse, because sex has to, by its very nature, be unitive and procreative. That is what sex is. Humana Vitae, section 12, go check it out. Sex is, by its very nature, unitive and procreative. So we have that physical unity of the bodies, and we allow for that procreative purpose, that procreative possibility to happen during intercourse. So that means the man's ejaculation has to happen during intercourse. His semen needs to have the opportunity to get to a possible egg. Yeah, not every sexual act results in a baby, right? But we always need to come into a sexual act offering our human ability and human possibility of procreation as well as unity. So that physical unity, as well as, emotional unity too, is very important. But that physical unity of intercourse and that procreative possibility of the man's ejaculation. Now, the woman's procreative possibility is kind of always present in intercourse, right? Her procreative possibility is the semen, the sperm, getting into the vaginal canal. That is the procreative possibility, right? So that's why the man's orgasm has to happen during intercourse. Now, the woman's orgasm is not inherently connected to the procreative purpose. A woman can get pregnant without ever having an orgasm. It is not a requirement of the procreative purpose. Now, John Paul II, when he wrote, back when he was a bishop, when he wrote Love and Responsibility, he had an incredible argument explaining why sexual pleasure is absolutely necessary for both the woman and the man, and that it is a justice issue if the woman does not receive an orgasm. So simply because it is not required for the procreative possibility does not mean that it is not important. In fact, I actually argue that it makes it more important. I go into more depth on that point in my orgasm course, which I'll also throw a link in the show notes to that if you're interested. But the fact that it's not inherently connected to that procreative purpose actually makes it more important, because we have to put more effort toward it. Now, because it's not connected to that procreative purpose, it doesn't have to happen during intercourse. It is phenomenal when a husband and a wife can orgasm at the same time. That is an incredible unitive act. That's a wonderful thing to strive for. It's not necessary, even though it's a wonderful thing to strive for, right? Just like it's not required for Catholics to pray the rosary. You don't have to pray the rosary as a Catholic, right? But it is incredible to pray the rosary. You will grow closer to God if you pray the rosary. Mary asks us in basically every Marian apparition to pray the rosary, right? There's very, very good things about praying the rosary, but you are not required as a Catholic to pray the rosary, right? So when we're talking just from like a moral perspective, the woman's orgasm is allowed to happen anywhere within that full sexual act. That full sexual act is foreplay, intercourse, and then optional afterplay. The woman's orgasm, because sexual pleasure and sexual arousal are designed for intercourse and that procreative and unitive act of sex, it is not permissible for the woman's orgasm to happen outside of a sexual act. But it can happen anywhere within the sexual act. So the woman's orgasm can happen during foreplay. Absolutely. The woman's orgasm can happen during intercourse, or the woman's orgasm can happen immediately after intercourse. If she doesn't receive an orgasm during foreplay or intercourse and still desires to have an orgasm, it is perfectly permissible for the man to manually or orally stimulate her toward orgasm after intercourse. It needs to be kind of directly after, not like do a little cleanup, start getting dressed and change your mind and want an orgasm. That's getting a little gray area. But if it's within that full sexual act, that's what we're talking about. So immediately after intercourse. So the other thing about the woman's orgasm, because of the way that the woman's body works, is many women are able to experience multiple orgasms. And so the woman could actually experience an orgasm during foreplay, experiencing one during intercourse, and maybe even experience another one after intercourse during afterplay. She could experience multiple orgasms during foreplay. That is completely up to the couple, completely up to what you guys are interested in and enjoy doing. Now, just because the woman's body is capable of experiencing multiple orgasms does not mean that the woman has to experience multiple orgasms. It's kind of this weird thing in the world that, oh my gosh, women should experience multiple orgasms. No, I mean, if you don't want to, you really don't need to. And for some women, it can actually cause kind of a lot of stress to try to achieve multiple orgasms, and it just becomes more of a burden and harder and not nearly as pleasurable. Okay, so we've talked about the orgasm. The last thing I want to cover is when can foreplay happen? So I talked about how sexual arousal is designed for intercourse, designed to prepare the body for intercourse. So that means that sexual arousal, the morally permissible place for sexual arousal, is immediately prior to intercourse. So foreplay acts should be in preparation for intercourse. Foreplay actions and direct stimulation of the genital area, direct arousal of your spouse shouldn't be happening unless you are planning to immediately pursue intercourse. So that means I use this example in quite a few of my courses, but if you are sitting on the couch and you ask your husband for a foot rub and it feels great and you actually notice that you yourself, you're getting a little bit sexually aroused, you have a couple of options. Option number one is you can follow that sexual arousal and initiate sex and, move forward and have a wonderful time and have sex. And that's a great thing. Now, if sex is off the table for you. Maybe you're avoiding pregnancy right now and you're in your fertile window, or there's just some other reason that sex can't happen that night. If you start feeling sexually aroused, you do need to stop that activity and just move on to something else. It does not need to be a big deal. The sexual arousal, if it was unintentional, there's no sin there. There's only sin if you then follow that sexual arousal and frustrate the sexual arousal by not actually then moving toward intercourse. All right. There's more to that. There's more nuance in that, but that is really kind of the basics of it. And I don't want this episode to get too terribly long. There's really what the church teaches about foreplay. Thanks so much for listening. If you are not already following us on Instagram, be sure to check us out at Charting Toward Intimacy. And if you listen to podcasts on a platform that gives you the option to rate or review, we'd love for you to do that because it helps us spread the word about the podcast. If you ever have questions, comments, or episode topic ideas, please reach out to us. We love to hear from you. You can reach out on Instagram or send us an email. Our email is in the show notes. Until next time.